Hello, this is Nick Coons with the Libertarian Solution Radio Show. Got a listener email. Sent it in a little while ago. I actually started doing this video a couple of weeks ago, and when I was going through and reviewing it, realized that my laptop battery had died in the middle of the video, so here I am starting over. But the email essentially asked, in the absence of government or government controlling the roads, how would we handle the roads? How would that work? Now, in my experience, before I get to how that could work, in my experience, there's two reasons to ask, what about the roads? And this has actually spawned a little bit of an inside joke among my friends and I. The first reason is because someone's legitimately wondering how transportation and roads can be handled if the government doesn't do it. Doesn't seem like a very profitable thing to take huge swaths of land and find people willing to pay for it in order to maintain roads. So I could see that being a legitimate question. The second reason is because after one is exposed to all the atrocities caused by government over the decades, in the 20th century, governments killed 250 million people throughout wars, holocausts, and that sort of thing. To ask, what about the roads, seems kind of petty. Like, well, I'm willing to accept 250 million murders because without that, we couldn't have roads. Now, I know that's not why this particular person was asking that question. He was asking based, I could tell from the phrasing of the email, that he legitimately is concerned about or wants to know how transportation can be handled in the absence of government. There's a couple things to look at here. First, I like the, when I'm talking about the market or the free market, I like the grocery store analogy. It works out really well because it works for a lot of examples. In this case, we can say that a particular grocery store that's been around for a long time, stocks its produce and, has meats and breads and, junk food and all sorts of things, we know for a fact, assuming we've got a free market type of situation here, that grocery store exists because it's providing what people want, and it's doing so in an efficient way. Because if it wasn't doing that, it wouldn't exist anymore. If it wasn't doing what consumers wanted, and it wasn't doing it at the price consumers were willing to pay, it would no longer exist, because consumers would stop paying for it. They would go for alternatives, whether it's going to their competitor grocery store or growing their own food and creating a neighborhood co-op, and whatever the different options are for growing food or creating food. The grocery store is the most efficient way because that's the one that exists and has an overwhelming amount of support by consumers, in that people tend to go to grocery stores on a regular basis and buy their food, and it's a completely voluntary exchange. So we know that grocery stores are efficient. We know that that's a very good way of distributing food. If something exists without that voluntary choice, we don't know anymore whether or not it's a way, that it's an efficient way to do it. So for instance, we have, let's say, the military. Because the military is really the only option for national defense, and because you are forced into paying into the system, whether you want to or not, it's really difficult to tell whether or not the military is efficient versus other alternatives that we haven't had a chance to experience, which is why we don't know whether or not it's an efficient way to do it. The same is true of roads. We have no idea if allotting large amounts of land, stripped land, and pouring asphalt and concrete over the top of it, and drawing lines and creating speed limits and having police patrol the roads is really an efficient method of transportation. The reason we don't know it is because there isn't much of an alternative to it. And it depends on the type of transportation. If you're going, across town or down the street, there really isn't an alternative. You can't take the train. You can't take an airplane. If you're going across country, we've got a couple of different alternatives. But in terms of the traveling and the transportation that most people do on a regular basis, it's impossible to tell whether or not roads are actually an efficient use of resources, because there's no option. There's no option whether or not to buy into the system or alternatives to the system that are allowed by the market, because of the way government controls transportation. So we don't know if we would have roads in the absence of government, or in the absence of government controlling transportation. We might have something totally better. An example of something that could be totally better would be a company called Skytran. We had them on the show a few months back. We interviewed them, the CEO of the company actually, and you can go back, and I think it was maybe in January or February of 2010. You can look at the show there that has Skytran, listen to that. But essentially the way it works is you have a rail system. It's not a rail system, it's an elevated pole line system, and It's supported by poles periodically, and you would go to one of these poles on a platform, and then you would summon a little pod. And the pod weighs about 200 pounds. It carries 2 passengers. You summon the pod, you get in, and you type into a computer where you want to go, and it takes you there between 100 and 200 miles an hour. So that means you could get somewhere in about 5 minutes, whereas you used to get there maybe 20 or 30 minutes, because you can go so much faster. And the reason it can travel so quickly is because it's completely computer controlled, so you don't have human error anymore. You don't have to worry about following distances, because the program can take care of all of that stuff. If it knows that the pod in front of you has to slow down, it can slow down accordingly. So it's something that runs runs faster, much more efficiently. It takes up a lot less space than a road. One single line can transport the same number of people as a 3-lane freeway. And it also costs about 1/10 the price of that freeway. It costs about $10 million a mile versus $100 million per mile. It's actually cheaper than a regular roadway too, so you could use this in place of surface transportation, surface roads and such. So there are options out there. Now, unfortunately, SkyTran, now it has been built in a test environment. It does work. You can find YouTube videos showing demonstrating it. But it doesn't actually exist in any metropolitan area. And back in the 90s, SkyTran went to the city of Phoenix and asked them for permission. They said, we want some right-of-ways. Can we install this? We don't want taxpayer money. We're going to charge for its use. It's going to be completely privately funded. And the city of Phoenix said no. They don't want to do that. Instead, they installed a light rail system 10 years later, which is controlled by the city. So you can come up with all different reasons of why the city might have rejected it. But it probably has something to do with control. It probably has something to do with the fact that they they wouldn't have control over this, that it would be controlled by a private entity, and they don't like that. There's all sorts of reasons. But what we do know is that government stands in the way of innovation. Government gets in the way of different ways that this could work, that transportation could work if the government wasn't controlling transportation. So if it turns out that roads were the most efficient way to do this, like the way we have it set up right now is exactly the right way to do it, that we should have it just this way, then there are a number of ways that they could be funded. So for instance, in a commercial environment, like at a major intersection, you've got a lot of shopping centers. The roads along the shopping centers and leading up to the shopping centers could be owned by the shopping centers. And the reason they would do that would be the same reason that they would build parking lots. Because if you don't have a way to get to the shopping center, then the shopping centers don't really do you any good. They can't have customers if they can't bring people to their places of business. So it would be in their best interest to maintain a set of roadways near their property, not roads going out for miles, but near their property, in order to make it possible and easy for you to access them and spend your money there. Like I said, the same reason that they handle parking lots. If they didn't build parking lots there, it'd be very difficult to go there because most people drive. So they would lose a lot of business without the parking lots. So the same reason they'd want to have roads if the government didn't provide the roads for them. Now the other thing too is that you might have interstate roads that are built, maintained, installed by companies like UPS, FedEx, DHL, Swift, dozens of trucking companies that would need to transport their goods across the country, interstate. But most likely when they build these roads, they wouldn't end up using them to capacity, because we can see right now with the interstate system that they aren't using them to capacity, that there's plenty of space on there for other traffic. So they would probably build the roads, but then they might lease out the ability to use the road. So maybe you pay a small fee, like a toll or something like that, when you jump on an interstate. You drive 100 miles and you pay a couple of bucks for that. So that's certainly a possibility as well. Now for neighborhood roads, that could be a little more complicated. Perhaps, the system, in the absence of government, we certainly wouldn't have the system of roads that we have now. But it is possible to have it in like a homeowners association, which I know a lot of people don't like HOAs. If you've lived in HOAs, the rules can be pretty strict. But they are completely legitimate in the sense that you had a single entity own all the property up front, and in selling the property has said that if you want to buy property here, then you have to follow these rules. And so anyone who moves into an HOA is voluntarily agreeing to the rules. So a lot of private communities that have HOAs also have private roads. They have a fully private road system within their jurisdiction area there, within the homeowners association. And those roads in general are maintained better than the public roads in neighborhoods that don't have homeowners association. Now, it's not necessarily to say that you should have HOAs everywhere, but it does show options there that do exist in order to fund roads and transportation without the government. So, while I like to put ideas out there about how the free market can handle things, I wouldn't say that this is how the market will handle it, because that's kind of a central planning approach, and if you don't have government, you don't have central planning. All you can do is suggest possibilities and let a bunch of entrepreneurs try different things and see which ones consumers like. So you can put ideas out there. Those are some of my ideas that I think would be